My brother slept with my wife in my house. My parents defended him and sued me for money, but I fought back and left them all bankrupt, in prison, and with nothing. I'm 34 years old. I work in AI and tech in Boston. And what I'm about to tell you basically destroyed what was left of my family. But you know what? In the end, it turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to me. The thing is, I discovered that my younger brother slept with my wife while I was on a business trip. And when I say my parents took his side, I mean they literally sued me to give them money for the two of them. Yeah, you read that right. But wait, because the story is much worse than it sounds. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand the full context. I grew up being basically invisible to my parents. I have a younger brother, Connor, who's 26 now, and from the moment he was born I ceased to exist for them. I'm not exaggerating, seriously. When Connor came into the family, my parents acted like they had finally had the child they always wanted, and I, who was like 8 years old at the time, became just the furniture taking up space in the house. Everything Connor wanted, Connor got. Toys, new clothes, classes and whatever, trips, constant attention. I basically lived on the leftovers of everything, literally and figuratively. They gave me clothes that no longer fit cousins or neighbors. I ate after they finished, and if I needed something for school, I had to beg for weeks or get it myself. My birthday was an afterthought, if they even remembered it, while Connor's was an event worthy of a Broadway production every year. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. But when you're a kid, you just try to survive, you know? So I threw myself completely into my studies because it was the only thing where I could excel and where nobody could take away what I achieved. I became an obsessive student, one of those who stays late at the library because at home there wasn't even a decent desk for me. While Connor was failing classes and my parents got him expensive private tutors and did his homework, I was getting the best grades, in school, without anyone's help. I won science competitions, published papers in youth research journals, got a full scholarship to college. My parents didn't even come to my high school graduation because it coincided with one of Connor's video game tournaments or something like that. I don't remember exactly what excuse they gave me. In college, I continued the same way. I majored in computer science and AI, worked part-time for my personal expenses even though the scholarship covered everything academic, and basically built my own life away from them. During my junior year, I got an exchange program in Seoul, South Korea, at a university that was doing cutting-edge research in machine learning. My parents not only didn't celebrate that I'd been accepted into a competitive international program, but my mother literally told me something like, "Well, at least now we won't have to worry about you here." As if I were a burden to them when I'd been years without asking them for a cent. Seoul changed my life. Honestly. I fell in love with the city, with the work culture, with how technology was integrated into everything. I ended up staying after graduation because they offered me an incredible job at a tech company that was developing AI systems for predictive analysis. My parents didn't even come to my college graduation. They claimed the trip was too expensive, but I know that same summer they went on vacation to Europe with Connor. Anyway, by that point I had stopped expecting anything from them. It was in Seoul where I met Grace. She was an English teacher at a private academy. American, too, but she'd been living in Korea for like 2 years when we met. She was smart, funny, seemed genuinely interested in my work and my dreams. We got married after 2 years of dating, a small and beautiful wedding in Seoul with our friends. I let my parents know months in advance, offered to pay for their tickets because I knew they'd use money as an excuse, but they said he couldn't leave Connor alone for so long because he was going through a difficult time. It was always something with Connor. I'd already gotten used to it, so Grace and I had our perfect wedding without them, and honestly it was better that way. I lived in Seoul 5 years after graduating. They were probably the best years of my life up to that point. My career took off. I got promoted several times. I was making really good money. Grace and I had a beautiful apartment in Gangnam. We traveled around Asia on weekends. I talked to my parents maybe once every 2 or 3 months, superficial 5-minute conversations where they basically updated me on Connor's latest adventures or disasters. Because yeah, Connor had turned out to be a complete disaster as an adult, but my parents kept treating him like he was a misunderstood genius. Then, like a year and a half ago, they offered me a huge promotion at my company's Boston office. I was going to lead the entire AI development department for the North American market. It was basically my dream job, with a pretty high six-figure salary. Grace and I talked about it a lot because it meant leaving Seoul, but she agreed it was an opportunity I couldn't turn down. We moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, got a beautiful house, and life seemed perfect. This is where everything starts to go to hell, basically. When my parents found out I'd returned to Boston, they suddenly reappeared in my life, and with them came Connor. My brother, who was now 25 years old, had supposedly matured and changed and was trying to rebuild his life after a series of failed jobs and businesses that never prospered. My parents begged me to give him a chance, to get to know him again as adults. That family was important. I frankly didn't want anything to do with it. I'd built my life without them and was happy that way. But Grace convinced me I should try. She came from a very close-knit family and didn't really understand the toxic dynamics of mine. She thought maybe things could improve now that we were all adults. Connor showed up at our house one Saturday afternoon, all smiles and hugs, apologizing for how things had been when we were kids, saying he now understood how unfair it all was. He seemed sincere, I have to admit. He talked to me about his plans for the future, about how he wanted to study web development, about how he admired what I had achieved. Grace was charmed by him, said he was charismatic and sweet. I had my reservations, but decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. We started seeing each other more often, family dinners every 2 weeks or so, where my parents also came. It was weird to be back in contact with them after years of distance, but Grace insisted it was healthy to rebuild those bridges. The problem is that Grace started inviting Connor to the house without consulting me. I'd come home from work and Connor was there, in my living room, drinking my beer, using my PlayStation. Grace would say he's been passing through the area and she invited him to stay for dinner, or that she needed help with something and called Connor. I started feeling uncomfortable but didn't want to seem like the resentful brother who couldn't get over the past, so I didn't say anything. Big mistake. In October last year, I had to travel to Seoul for a week for a series of meetings with our Korean partners. It was a trip I couldn't postpone. One of those where I basically had meetings from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. I told Grace I was sorry, that it would be a tough week, but I'd be back soon. She said it was no problem, that she'd take advantage to catch up on grading and preparing classes. The night before I left, I suggested she call her sister if she felt lonely, and she told me she might invite Connor over for dinner one day, that she liked having company. I wasn't thrilled with the idea, but I wasn't going to tell her who she could or couldn't spend time with in her own house. What I didn't know is that Connor practically moved into my house that week, and that my parents also spent several days there, and that what happened happened. I came back Friday night, destroyed by jet lag and marathon meetings. Grace was acting weird, like nervous and overcompensating with affection, but I was so tired I didn't process the signals. On Saturday, she organized a family dinner, said she wanted to celebrate my return. My parents and Connor came, and something about the dynamic felt completely off. Connor was acting strangely possessive with Grace, like he served her food, filled her glass before she asked, sat next to her instead of across like he always did. My parents were weird too, like guilty, but trying to act normal. I attributed it to tiredness. Thought maybe I was paranoid from lack of sleep. Then Grace dropped the bomb. She said she had news to share, that she was pregnant. Obviously, I got excited, hugged her. But when I looked around the table, Connor had this strange smile on his face, and my parents looked between relieved and nervous. My mother said something like, "Well, that's wonderful. Now we'll really be a family," which was an odd comment considering Grace, and I had already been married for years. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something didn't add up. Grace had had like 3 glasses of wine during dinner before announcing the pregnancy, which didn't make sense if she knew she was pregnant. Connor had stayed until very late, longer than normal, and when he finally left, he gave Grace a hug that lasted too long, and my parents kept acting guilty about something. The next day, Sunday, I started checking the security cameras. We have cameras at the entrance, in the living room, in the kitchen, not in the bedrooms obviously, but in the common areas. I realized that the camera memory was empty for the whole week I was gone. But here's the thing. I'm a tech guy, and I have everything configured with automatic cloud backup. Nobody knew about that except me. It took me like 2 hours to download all the files and start reviewing them. And there it all was. Connor, arriving Monday morning. I'd barely been gone a few hours. Grace opening the door in pajamas. The two of them kissing in the entrance. It wasn't a brother-in-law kiss. It was a lover's kiss. I forced myself to keep watching. Connor going upstairs with Grace. To our bedroom. Coming out 2 hours later. Leaving. Coming back that night. Same thing. Tuesday and Wednesday. Thursday, my parents arrived too. They stayed talking in the living room with Grace, while Connor went up alone. And then Grace went up. My parents knew. They were there, facilitating everything. Friday, the day I was coming back, Connor spent all morning at my house, and the three of them, Connor, Grace, and my parents, meticulously cleaned everything, changed the sheets, and someone, probably Connor because he's the only one stupid enough, tried to delete the cameras from the physical panel, without knowing about the backup. I stayed in my home office watching the videos until 4 a.m. I didn't cry, didn't scream, just felt this cold, calculated fury growing inside me. Each video was worse than the last. I watched them kissing in my kitchen, using my living room, my bed. There were videos of them laughing, Connor saying things like, "Your husband is an idiot, he'll never find out." Grace telling him I was boring, that I only talked about work, that Connor made her feel alive. My parents in one video saying I'd never deserved someone like Grace, that it was better for Connor to be with her because I wasn't going to be a good father anyway. I was too focused on work. Monday morning, I waited for Grace to leave for work. I called my office and said I was sick. I spent the day downloading all the videos, organizing them, making copies in different places. Then I called a lawyer. Valerie, a woman who'd been recommended to me by a colleague who'd gone through a complicated divorce. Told her everything, showed her the videos. She went pale. She told me this was enough, not only for divorce, but potentially for other things, to keep collecting evidence, but not to confront anyone yet. I spent 2 weeks acting normal. It was the hardest thing I've done in my life. Smiling at Grace, pretending I was excited about the baby, responding to Connor's messages asking if I wanted to go get beers. Meanwhile, Valerie was building a case. I was investigating Connor on my own, and I found he had a long history of scams and small frauds. Pyramid schemes he'd tried to set up, fake products he sold online. He'd even scammed a local church by selling them sound equipment he never delivered. My parents had always paid to get him out of those problems. That's why he never had a criminal record, but the victims were there. Finally, the moment came. One night, after another family dinner at my house, when Grace was serving dessert, I put my laptop on the table and pressed play. The first video was of Connor and Grace kissing in my entrance. Grace dropped the plate. Connor got up from his chair. My parents froze. I let the video run. 3 full minutes. Nobody spoke. Then I played another, and another. I'd selected like 10 of the worst ones. Grace started crying, saying she could explain, that it had been a mistake, that she loved me. Connor had the nerve to say, what did I expect? That I was never home, that Grace needed attention. My parents, instead of apologizing or showing shame, started defending him. My father said I'd always been selfish, that my career was more important than my family, that it was normal for Grace to seek comfort in someone who was actually present. My mother added that Connor and Grace made a better couple anyway, that I should be the adult and accept the situation, that the baby needed a present father and that wasn't going to be me with my work trips. I kicked them all out of my house. I told them the next day they were going to receive divorce papers, that Connor was going to receive a lawsuit, that my parents were never going to see me again. Connor tried to get aggressive, came at me like he was going to hit me, but I have like 4 inches and 30 pounds on him. And besides, I'd been carrying so much pent-up rage that I think he saw in my eyes that if he touched me, I was going to destroy him. All 4 of them left, Grace crying, Connor screaming threats, my parents telling me I was an ungrateful son. The next morning, Grace came back to the house while I was at work and started taking her things. I'd changed the locks, but let her take her stuff with Valerie's supervision. Grace tried to talk to me, begged me to reconsider, said the baby was mine, not Connor's, that it had only been sex, but she loved me. I told her I didn't care whose baby it was, that our marriage had ended the moment she decided to open her legs for my brother in my bed. Here's where things get even crazier. 2 weeks after that, I received legal notice. My parents were suing me. Basically, they were saying that as the eldest son, I had a family obligation to support my younger brother in difficult times, and that now that Connor was going to be a father, I should contribute monthly to his maintenance. They were asking for $5,000 monthly for Connor and $3,000 monthly for Grace, plus $50,000 immediately, so Connor could start a business and support his new family. I swear, when I read those papers, I thought it was a joke. My lawyer said it was one of the most ridiculous lawsuits she'd seen, but that technically they had the right to file it even though it had no chance of succeeding. Valerie and I decided to go on the offensive. She contacted all of Connor's victims we could find and organized a class action lawsuit for fraud. It turned out Connor had scammed like 15 people in the last 3 years, from elderly church members to small local businesses, always with the same method: selling products or services he never delivered, and my parents always paid to make the problem disappear. But this time, it wasn't going to be that easy. During the discovery process of the divorce case, we found something even worse. Grace had been helping Connor access personal information. As a teacher at an expensive private school, she had access to parent directories with addresses, phone numbers, basic financial information. Connor had been using that information for his scams, targeting families he knew had money. Grace knew it and facilitated it. That wasn't just fraud. It was a serious privacy violation and probably illegal under various data protection laws. The case went to court in February this year. It was a spectacle. Connor tried to play the victim, saying he and Grace had genuinely fallen in love, that I was an absent husband, that he just wanted to be happy. Grace cried on the stand, said she'd made a mistake but shouldn't lose her job and reputation over it. My parents testified saying I'd been a bad son my whole life, that Connor was sensitive and needed support, that it was my duty to help them. The judge looked at them with a face I still remember, like total disgust, and after seeing all the videos and evidence basically demolished their arguments in 5 minutes. My parents' lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, which means they can't file it again. Additionally, the judge ordered an investigation into my parents for their role in facilitating Connor's criminal activities, because they'd basically been accomplices by paying victims to silence them instead of making Connor face the consequences. The divorce was granted immediately on grounds of adultery. I didn't have to pay Grace anything. She had no right to alimony considering the circumstances. The house stayed completely in my name. The class action lawsuit against Connor proceeded, and it turned out he'd defrauded over $200,000 total from all his victims. The district attorney got interested in the case when Grace's use of school information to facilitate fraud came to light. The school where Grace worked started their own investigation. They found she had indeed been violating privacy policies. They fired her and basically put her name on an education blacklist. It's going to be almost impossible for her to get another job as a teacher. Connor, seeing things getting bad, tried to flee to Florida where he had a friend. What he didn't know is that friend was part of an FBI undercover operation investigating online fraud schemes, and Connor, being the genius he is, immediately tried to scam the wrong person who turned out to be an agent. They arrested him in Miami like 2 months after the divorce judgment. Meanwhile, I got a paternity test. I needed to know. Grace had insisted throughout the process that the baby was mine, that she'd only slept with Connor that week, but that she and I had been trying to have kids before. The test confirmed that yes, the baby is mine. Grace gave birth in April. A girl. I haven't seen the baby. I have no intention of seeing her for now. Legally, I'm going to establish custody and pay child support because I'm not going to punish an innocent child for what her mother did, but I have no desire to be in Grace's life beyond what the law requires for my daughter. Grace and Connor tried one last desperate move in May. They showed up at my door, Grace with the baby, saying they needed money, that they had nowhere to live, that I had a moral obligation to help them. Connor got aggressive again when I didn't open the door, started banging on it and yelling that he was going to ruin my life. Everything was recorded on my new security camera with audio. I called the police. They arrived in 10 minutes. arrested Connor for disturbing the peace and for violating a restraining order I'd gotten in March. Grace left crying with the baby. The cherry on top came last month. My parents, in one last attempt to make me feel guilty, organized an intervention at their church. They invited the pastor, some congregation elders, and basically wanted everyone to tell me I should forgive and help my family. What they didn't expect is that 3 of those elders were victims of Connor's scams. When they found out why I was there, the intervention turned into an interrogation of my parents about how they'd raised someone capable of stealing from elderly people in their own church. My parents left humiliated from their own church. The pastor called me later to apologize, said he had no idea about the whole story. Right now, Connor is in prison awaiting trial. He's facing like 5 years minimum. Grace lives with her parents in another state, I think in Ohio, with the baby. My parents have practically been ostracized from their social circle after everything came to light. They contact me every so often, begging me to drop the lawsuits or to help them financially because they're spending all their savings on lawyers for Connor. But I block them every time. Valerie says the criminal case against Connor is solid. There's too much evidence, and they'll probably be able to recover some money for the victims from his assets and my parents' assets that were in his name. And me? I'm doing well, I guess. Better than I'd expect to be. Work is going amazing. I just closed a massive project that will probably get me another promotion. I bought a new apartment in downtown Boston. Smaller than the house, but just for me. I started therapy because Valerie suggested that processing all this with a professional would be good, and she was right. I've been seeing someone new, nothing serious yet, but it's refreshing to be with someone who doesn't have insane family drama. Last week I received the final papers from the civil case against Connor. We won, obviously. He owes me like $60,000 in damages, plus what he owes to the other victims. I'm probably never going to see that money, but I don't care. It was never about the money. It was about establishing that actions have consequences, something my parents never taught him. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just stayed no contact with my family when I moved to Boston. I'd probably still be married, happy, ignorant. But then I remember the videos, the lies, and I know I would have eventually discovered the truth somehow. And at least now I know exactly who these people are. There are no more illusions that someday they might change or that we could be a normal family. My daughter turns 6 months old next week. I've been mentally preparing myself to meet her, to establish that first contact, not for Grace, but for her. She deserves to have a father, even if that father comes with all this complicated baggage. My therapist says it's a good step, that I can be a father without necessarily forgiving or forgetting what happened. We'll see how it goes. The craziest thing about all this is that my life is objectively better now than it was a year ago. Without the dead weight of a toxic family and an unfaithful wife, I have more time, more energy, more peace of mind. Sometimes I think Connor unintentionally did me a favor, although obviously he didn't do it with that intention. He freed me from people who never valued me, who always saw me as an ATM or as the defective son who didn't deserve attention. And yes, there are difficult days. Days where I think about the life I imagined I was going to have, the family I thought I was building with Grace, the Sundays I fantasized about spending with my kids, teaching them to code or taking them to science museums. That life evaporated. But honestly, I prefer this harsh reality, where I know the truth to that fantasy built on lies and betrayal. At least now, everything is real, genuine, mine. Connor keeps sending me letters from prison. His lawyers say if I drop the civil lawsuit and testify in his favor, saying he's a good guy who made mistakes, the judge might be more lenient. I tear them up without reading them completely. My parents left a voicemail last week saying Connor is depressed in prison, that he's my brother and I should help him, that family forgives. I deleted the message without finishing it. Grace wrote me by email asking if we could talk about the baby, that she wants me to be involved but on her terms. I replied that everything goes through the lawyers and the legal custody documents, that we're not going to have any casual conversation as if we were friends. The truth is, I don't feel guilt. I thought I would, that maybe eventually I'd soften, but no. Every time a little doubt or compassion starts to arise, I remember Grace telling Connor I was boring and I'd never find out. I remember my parents in my living room saying I didn't deserve to be a father. I remember Connor laughing in my kitchen saying I was an idiot. And the doubt disappears.